A quiet evening at the office was supposed to be just another ordinary night. But when she walked toward me, everything I thought I knew about my life changed in an instant. If you'd asked me 6 months ago where I saw my career heading, I'd have given the usual answer: steady job, slow but sure promotions, and maybe, if I was lucky, a corner office with a view of the river one day. But that was before I met Elena, my boss. And with her, nothing was ever simple. It was one of those crisp, foggy mornings when even the richest espresso couldn't quite shake the haze from my eyes. The office felt heavy with routine, the kind that makes every day blur into the next. I pushed through the revolving doors wrapped in my scarf, barely lifting my head as I made my way to the elevators. Then I saw her. Elena stood by the polished granite reception desk, leaning casually against it, somehow turning the sterile lobby into something out of a noir film, shadows and light playing across her sharp features. In the few months since I joined the agency, I'd learned one thing quickly. Elena wasn't like other directors. She was brilliant, commanding, impossible to ignore. She had that rare presence, the kind that could inspire or unsettle with the same effortless glance. And when she spoke, it felt like the rest of the world dimmed, her words cutting through the noise like a blade. That morning, her eyes met mine across the lobby, and a sudden jolt ran through me, warmer than the steam from my coffee cup. "Good morning, Julian," she said, her tone smooth yet laced with intent. I nodded politely, the way I always did with superiors, and reached for the elevator button. But then her voice came again, closer this time. "Do you have a minute? There's something I'd like to discuss." There was a faint curve to her lips, but her eyes, they were focused, piercing, as if every syllable was deliberate. I followed her to a secluded alcove near the floor-to-ceiling windows, where the early sunlight filtered through in soft, golden beams casting elongated shadows on the marble floor. A strange tension hummed in the air, something unspoken, but I told myself it was nothing out of the ordinary. Probably just feedback on my latest report or a new client pitch. But then her voice dropped low and measured. "I need someone who can keep a secret," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Someone I can trust. Someone outside the usual office politics and chatter." I blinked, trying to process her words. This wasn't a performance review. This wasn't business as usual. There was something intimate in her tone, something that felt perilously close to personal. It sent a quiet unease through me, a tension I couldn't quite name. She looked me directly in the eyes, waiting, as if gauging my soul. "Of course," I replied, perhaps too eagerly. My heart raced, a cocktail of curiosity and caution swirling inside. "You can trust me." She smiled then, but it wasn't the polished smile she wore in board meetings. It was subtle, enigmatic, like she was probing, observing my every micro-expression. "I had a feeling about you," she murmured softly, and just like that, she turned on her heel and strode away, leaving me rooted there with a whirlwind of questions churning in my mind. The rest of the morning dissolved into a haze. Her words lingered like a persistent echo I couldn't mute. I tried to bury myself in spreadsheets and emails, convincing myself it was nothing more than a sensitive assignment. Maybe a high-profile client with NDAs thicker than novels. By lunchtime, I'd nearly convinced myself. But when I returned to my desk, a new email from Elena awaited in my inbox. No subject line, just one line. "Meet me at the bistro on Elm Street after work." My pulse quickened. It didn't feel like a standard debrief. Not this time. Whatever this was, it was only just beginning. Still, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't say no. I closed the email and tried not to overanalyze. But the anticipation built like a storm as the hours crawled by. Each tick of the clock felt deliberate, mocking. At exactly 5, I grabbed my coat and slipped out of the office. The bistro was a cozy vintage spot. Dim amber lights, exposed brick walls, and a quiet elegance that made it feel worlds away from our sleek corporate tower. And I saw her the moment I stepped inside. Elena was seated at a small table in the back, nursing a glass of red wine, her eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window. For a moment I just stood there watching her. She looked composed, utterly in control, like she inhabited a realm of her own design. When she noticed me, her expression softened ever so slightly. She gestured to the chair opposite her, and I sat down, feeling oddly displaced, like I'd wandered into a private tableau. She took a slow sip of her wine before speaking, her gaze steady, inscrutable. "I wanted to talk outside the office," she said finally. "Some conversations are better kept compartmentalized." I nodded, unsure how to bridge the silence. There was a gravity to her voice, something that hinted this transcended work. Before I could formulate a question, she leaned forward a fraction, her voice lowering to a confidential timbre. "There's something I'm pursuing," she said. "It's unconventional. But I need someone I can rely on absolutely." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The way she held my gaze, patient, expectant, conveyed this was deeper than any campaign or merger. A surge of intrigue mingled with an indefinable thrill. My heartbeat accelerated, but I managed a small nod, not trusting my voice. She smiled, brief but authentic, the kind that made you feel truly perceived. "Good," she said softly, easing back in her chair. "I suspected you'd grasp it." She swirled her wine, her eyes never leaving mine. Then, almost offhandedly, though her tone carried layers, she asked, "Tell me honestly, Julian, why did you really take this job?" I hesitated, thrown off balance. My response came haltingly. "I suppose I craved a real challenge," I admitted. "Something to stretch me, to prove I could evolve." She nodded, as if she'd anticipated every word. For a few moments we sat in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just charged, brimming with the unsaid. It felt electric, like the space between us was alive with possibility. "Why did you take this job?" I ventured, surprising myself. It wasn't the sort of question one posed to a superior, especially one as guarded as Elena. She usually armored her personal life behind impeccable professionalism, but the way she considered it made me crave her answer. For a moment, it felt like we were teetering on the brink of revelation. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, introspective. "Sometimes we must embrace risks to claim what we truly desire," she said, her eyes locking onto mine with intensity. "To transcend the limits we impose on ourselves." I wasn't entirely sure of her meaning, but the words embedded themselves in me, resonating in the quiet void between us. There was a raw edge to her delivery, a glimpse of vulnerability she rarely unveiled. As we lingered there, the bistro's ambient murmur faded, and for a fleeting instant, it seemed we were both grasping for something profound, something elusive. Eventually, she glanced at her delicate watch, a subtle frown etching her brow. "I have to go," she said, a note of reluctance threading her words. "But ponder what we've discussed about trust." She rose gracefully, left a crisp bill on the table, and gave me one final lingering look. "See you tomorrow," she murmured. Then she melted into the evening drizzle. I remained seated for a while, staring at the vacant chair. Everything she'd said reverberated in my thoughts. It felt like I was perched on the precipice of something authentic, something transformative. As I walked home that night through the slick streets, I knew one thing unequivocally. This wasn't over. It was merely the prologue. The next morning, focus eluded me. Elena's words looped endlessly. Sometimes we must embrace risks to claim what we truly desire. There was an undercurrent in that phrase, almost an allure to venture beyond the known. By the time I arrived at the office, my nerves were alight, my mind a vortex. I wasn't sure if she'd even referenced the bistro encounter. Hours ticked by. Nothing. Elena glided through the day as always, poised, decisive, darting between strategy sessions. She scarcely glanced my way. Part of me sighed in relief, but a deeper part ached with unspoken disappointment. Perhaps I'd fabricated the spark. At lunch, I sought clarity with a stroll around the block. The brisk air helped marginally, but as I neared the entrance, my phone vibrated. A text illuminated the screen. "Elena, Executive Lounge, now." My heart lurched. I rushed back inside, navigating the maze of cubicles and colleagues, my pulse thundering with each stride. I had no idea what awaited, but instinct whispered this was the pivot point. Entering the executive lounge, I was startled to find her alone. Elena stood by the panoramic window, hands clasped behind her back, gazing at the sprawling cityscape below. She didn't turn as I approached. The silence stretched, taut and palpable, almost vibrating. "Close the door," she said at last, her voice low and weighted with unspoken depth. I complied. The latch clicked shut, the sound reverberating like a sealed fate. For a moment, she remained still. Then she pivoted to face me. Her expression was a mask, calm, yet impenetrable. "You're likely wondering why I summoned you," she began, her eyes pinning mine. "Trust doesn't come easily to me, especially in this cutthroat world. But I've observed you from your first day. There's an authenticity about you, Julian, something that assures me you can manage what I'm about to propose." She took a deliberate step closer, the distance between us contracting, the atmosphere thickening with unspoken electricity. "I have an endeavor," she continued. "I have an endeavor," she continued, her tone dipping to a near whisper. "It demands absolute discretion and a willingness to embrace risks that stray far from standard protocols." My throat constricted, but I nodded. "I can handle it," I said quietly. "Whatever it entails." She scrutinized me intently, her gaze probing. "Are you certain?" she pressed. "Once committed, there's no retreat. This isn't merely professional." She paused, letting the words settle. "It's profoundly personal." Her declaration hung suspended, laden with promise and peril. The room felt charged, as if thunder rumbling just beyond the horizon. I swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing down. "I'm in," I whispered, the words escaping before doubt could intervene. A flicker of approval crossed her features. Subtle, but there. "Very well," she said, her voice softening. "But understand, this begins slowly, layers unfolding over time." She moved to the sleek conference table, pulling out a slim folder from her briefcase. Inside were documents, contracts, maps, cryptic notes in her elegant script. "This is a side venture," she explained, sliding one page toward me. "An acquisition, but not the corporate kind. It's about reclaiming something lost, something that could redefine us both." I scanned the pages, references to an old estate on the outskirts of the city, whispers of hidden artifacts, ties to a forgotten family legacy. It read like a thriller plot, not a workday task. "Why me?" I asked, looking up. "Because you're not entangled in the webs others weave here," she replied. "And because I see potential in you, the kind that thrives in shadows." Her fingers brushed mine as she pointed to a clause, a contact deliberate yet fleeting, sending a spark up my arm. We spent the next hour dissecting details, timelines, alibis, discrete meetings. She was methodical, revealing just enough to hook me without overwhelming. "Our first step, reconnaissance tonight," she said as we wrapped up. "Meet me at the old bridge at 9. Come alone." The afternoon blurred in a frenzy of feigned normalcy. I attended meetings, nodded through presentations, but my mind was elsewhere, on fog-shrouded bridges and enigmatic bosses. As dusk fell, doubt crept in. Was this a test? A seduction? Or something far more dangerous? At 9 sharp, I arrived at the bridge, the river murmuring below, mist curling like secrets. Elena emerged from the shadows, clad in a dark trench coat, her hair loose for the first time I'd seen. "You're punctual," she noted with a half-smile. "Good. Punctuality builds trust." We walked along the water's edge, her explaining in hushed tones. The estate belonged to a rival firm's founder, harboring documents that could expose corruption and tie back to her own past. "My family was wrong decades ago," she confessed, vulnerability cracking her facade. "This is justice, but it requires breaking rules." The night deepened as we scouted the perimeter, fences, guards, entry points. Adrenaline surged. Her proximity was intoxicating. A brush of hands, a shared glance in the moonlight. "You're a natural," she whispered during a close call with a patrol light. Days turned to weeks. Secret rendezvous became routine. Late-night drives to archives, decoding encrypted files in hidden cafes, forging alliances with unlikely informants. Each encounter peeled back layers of the plot of her. I learned of her ambitious rise from humble beginnings, the betrayals that hardened her. In return, I shared my own stagnancy, the dreams I'd buried under ambition. Tension built, not just in the heist-like preparations, but between us. Stolen moments in empty parking garages, her hand lingering on my arm. "This risk, it's worth it," she'd say, eyes searching mine. One evening, after narrowly escaping detection at a gala where we posed as guests, we ended up in her car, rain lashing the windows. "You're more than I expected," she admitted, her face inches from mine. The air crackled. Then, inevitably, our lips met, fierce, urgent, a release of pent-up energy. It was wrong, thrilling, irreversible, but complications arose. A colleague grew suspicious. Anonymous tips threatened exposure. Elena's resolve steeled. "We push forward," she declared. The climax loomed, infiltration night. Under cover of darkness, we breached the estate, heart-pounding stealth through corridors, retrieving the damning evidence. Alarms blared mid-escape, chaos, pursuit. We fled into the woods, breathless, alive. Back in the city, documents in hand, victory tasted sweet. But dawn brought reckoning. "This changes everything," Elena said, holding the files and my gaze. "Our worlds intertwine now, professionally, personally. Risks taken, trusts forged in fire." As months passed, promotions came, not the slow kind I'd once envisioned, but meteoric. The window office? Mine. But greater was the partnership with her, equals in ambition, lovers in shadows. The ordinary night that started it all? A distant memory. With Elena, life was a grand, unpredictable adventure, and it was only the beginning. The irreversible had just begun. My pulse quickened. But I didn't look away. "I'm sure," I said. The words steady despite the tremor inside me. Victor Hale leaned against the edge of his desk, arms crossed, watching me the way a chess player studies the board before the final move. The late afternoon light slanted through the blinds, striping his charcoal suit in gold and shadow. He didn't smile, not exactly. A corner of his mouth lifted, reluctant, as if the expression had to be coaxed out. "Good," he said, voice low enough that the room itself seemed to lean in to listen. "Tonight, then." I didn't ask where. I didn't need to. The gravity in his tone told me the rest. The office emptied in slow motion. Phones stopped ringing, heels stopped clicking. The copier finally sighed its last. I stayed at my station long after the others had gone, pretending to finish a report while every cell in my body counted down to 6. When the clock finally released me, I walked the dim corridor to his corner office. Victor was already there, jacket gone, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked up from his laptop, closed it with a soft snap, and stood. "Close the door." The click of the latch sounded ceremonial. He didn't speak again until we were in the elevator descending to the underground garage. The silence between us was its own language, dense and vibrating. Outside, a matte black sedan idled at the curb. The driver never glanced back. Victor opened the rear door himself and waited until I slid across cool leather before joining me. The car pulled away from the tower of glass and steel that had contained us all day and slipped into the city's bloodstream. Streetlights flickered over his profile, high cheekbones, the faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the mouth that rarely gave anything away. I watched the reflection slide across his face and disappear. We left the bright arteries of downtown for narrower veins, older brick, fewer neon signs. The car stopped in front of a restaurant I'd never noticed. No sign, just a brass number on a black door. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and candle wax. A hostess in a midnight dress led us past empty tables to a velvet-curtained alcove at the very back. Victor ordered for both of us, something amber and heavy crystal, without consulting the leather-bound menu. The jazz was so soft it felt like a heartbeat under the floorboards. He didn't touch his glass. "I need someone I can trust," he said. Not just with numbers or deadlines. With everything. The candle between us guttered. Wax pooled like liquid gold. Everything, I repeated. The word tasted dangerous. His gaze didn't waver. This stays outside the building. Outside daylight. No overlap, no bleed. Can you do that? I heard the subtext. Can you keep the parts of yourself that belong to me separate from the parts that belong to the firm, to your life, to the version of you the world is allowed to see? My pulse was a drumline in my ears. Yes, he lifted his glass at last. I mirrored him. The crystal chimed, a small, irrevocable sound. We drank. The liquor burned a clean line down my throat and settled warm in my stomach. When he set his glass down, the tension in his shoulders eased a fraction. Conversation drifted. Market volatility, a deal in Singapore, the absurd price of coffee beans. But underneath ran a current too strong for words. Every time his eyes met mine, the room shrank. Later, outside, the night air was sharp enough to cut. He didn't offer his coat. Instead, his hand brushed mine as we walked to the car, accidental, deliberate, impossible to tell. Electricity snapped up my arm. He didn't apologize. He didn't speak. He simply looked at me, and in the half-shadow I saw something unguarded flicker across his face. Then it was gone, shuttered behind the cool mask he wore for the world. The driver took us deeper into the city's older quarter. We left the car at the mouth of an alley and walked. Our footsteps echoed between brick walls slick with recent rain. At the end, a single red bulb glowed above an unmarked door. Inside, low ceilings, scarred wood, the smell of whiskey and old smoke. The bartender, a woman with silver streaking her braid, nodded at Victor like they shared history. We took the last booth. Here the mask slipped further. We talked about childhood summers, about the first time we each realized money could buy silence, about the particular loneliness of being very good at something no one else understood. At one point, his knee pressed against mine under the table. He didn't move it. Neither did I. When the bottle was empty, he paid in cash and we stepped back into the alley. The red bulb had burned out. Only starlight and distant neon lit the way. At my building, he stopped beneath the awning. The doorman pretended not to watch. Think about it, Victor said. All of it. Then tell me. I nodded, throat too tight for words. He studied my face a moment longer, as if memorizing the answer he hadn't yet been given, then turned and disappeared into the back of the waiting car. I didn't sleep. Every glance, every accidental touch, every weighted silence replayed in high definition. By the time the sky over the river turned pearl, I knew what I would do. The next week was a master class in restraint. In meetings, Victor was impeccable. Sharp questions, clipped praise, zero indication that anything had changed. But in the hallway, his fingers grazed the small of my back, guiding me through a doorway. In the elevator, the air between us crackled, though we stood a careful foot apart. I began to live for the almosts. The almost brush of shoulders. The almost smile, the almost confession in his eyes when no one else was looking. 8 days later, he summoned me to the executive floor after hours. The building was a tomb, security lights humming, the faint smell of lemon polish. His office door was ajar. Inside, only one lamp burned. He stood at the window, city spread beneath him like a circuit board. When he turned, the hard lines of his face had softened into something almost uncertain. Close it, he said. I did. The lock engaged with a soft snick. He didn't move from the window. I tried to keep this theoretical, he said to the glass. A thought experiment. But theory has limits. My heart slammed against my ribs. And now? He faced me fully. Now I need to know if you're still sure. The space between us felt suddenly negotiable. I took one step, then another. When I was close enough to see the pulse in his throat, I stopped. I'm sure, I said. Something fractured in his expression. Relief, hunger, fear, all at once. He lifted a hand, hesitated, then let his knuckles graze my cheek. The touch was feather-light and seismic. I don't do this, he said, voice rough. I don't let anything in that I can't control. Then don't control it, I whispered. His eyes searched mine, dark and endless. Then slowly, as if the decision required every ounce of willpower he possessed, he closed the distance. The first kiss was careful, almost chaste, lips brushing, testing. The second was not. His hand slid to the nape of my neck, anchoring me as the world tilted. I tasted whiskey and want and the faint metallic edge of restraint finally snapping. We broke apart only when breathing became necessary. Foreheads pressed together, we stood in the small circle of lamplight, the city glittering indifferently beyond the glass. "This changes the board," he said against my skin. "I know." He pulled back just enough to meet my eyes. "No going back." "I don't want to." For a long moment he simply looked at me, as if confirming I meant it. Then he kissed me again, slower, deeper, a promise and a claim all at once. Later, when the lamp had burned low and our clothes were a careless map across the carpet, he traced the line of my shoulder with one fingertip. "Separate lives," he murmured. "Daylight and dark." "Can we do that?" "We'll have to," I said. He nodded, but I felt the tension in him, the same tension humming through me. We were building a bridge over a canyon and pretending the wind wouldn't shake it. Dawn crept in, pink and accusatory. We dressed in silence, stealing glances like thieves. At the door he paused. "Monday," he said. "Same as always." "Same as always," I echoed. But nothing was the same. The weeks that followed were a high-wire act. In conference rooms, we were flawless. Data, projections, the cool choreography of ambition. In stairwells, in the service elevator, in the locked supply closet on the 43rd floor, we were something else entirely. Every touch carried the thrill of risk. Every stolen minute was a countdown. Then came the merger. Late nights bled into early mornings. Victor's temper frayed. Mine followed. We snapped at each other over seating charts and valuation models, then made up in the copy room with the lights off and the machines humming like conspirators. One night, after a 12-hour death march through due diligence, we ended up at his penthouse overlooking the park. Rain lashed the windows. He poured 2 fingers of something older than both of us combined and handed me a glass. "I'm tired of pretending," he said. The admission hung between us. Fragile as the crystal in my hand, so am I. He set his glass down untouched. "Then let's stop," I laughed, short, incredulous. "Just like that?" "No," he said. "Not just like that. But I'm done compartmentalizing you." The rain intensified, drumming the glass like impatient fingers. I thought of boardrooms and NDAs, of the partners who still called him the Ice King behind his back. I thought of my own reputation, hard-won and fragile. "And if it implodes?" I asked. "Then we burn together." He said it simply, as if the prospect held no terror. Maybe for him it didn't. I crossed the room and took the glass from his hand, set it beside mine. "Together, then." His arms came around me hard enough to lift me off my feet. We didn't make it to the bedroom. Afterward, tangled in cashmere and city light, he traced idle circles on my spin. Afterward, tangled in cashmere and city light, he traced idle circles on my spine. "Monday," he said. "I'd tell them." Fear spiked, bright and cold. "Victor, I'm not asking permission," he said. "I'm giving notice. The conflict is mine, not yours." I propped myself on an elbow. "They'll crucify you." "Let them." His smile was small, fierce. "I've survived worse." Monday came. The boardroom was arctic. Victor laid it out. Calm, surgical, no apologies. Resignations were demanded. He tendered his immediately. I kept my job. Barely. The whispers followed me down hallways like smoke. We moved into a loft in the warehouse district. Exposed brick, tall windows, no neighbors close enough to hear arguments or laughter. We learned the contours of a life without secrecy. Some nights we cooked barefoot while jazz spilled from hidden speakers. Some nights we fought over whose turn it was to deal with the press. There was always press. But every morning I woke to the weight of his arm across my waist and knew the risk had been worth it. Years later, when someone asked how we'd managed to turn scandal into something solid, Victor would shrug and say, "We stopped pretending the line mattered more than the people standing on either side of it." He never mentioned the nights we almost walked away. I never mentioned the dreams where I still felt the ghost pressure of a door closing behind me. Some boundaries, once crossed, redraw the map entirely. Ours did.